The lights of Studio One at NBC's Burbank headquarters had never felt so heavy. It was May 1988, and Dean Martin, the legendary crooner who had charmed America for decades with his smooth voice and effortless cool, sat across from Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. The audience buzzed with excitement, thrilled to see one of their all-time favorites. But something was different that night. Dean looked tired, his trademark sparkle dimmed by an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. What happened next would become one of the most shocking and heartbreaking moments in television history. The man who had stood beside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., who had made audiences laugh and cry for generations, was about to experience a moment that would reveal just how fragile life truly is. If you love stories about Hollywood's golden era and the untold moments that shaped entertainment history, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the real stories behind the legends. This is the story of Dean Martin's final interview with Johnny Carson, a night that began with nostalgia and ended with silence. To understand the weight of that fateful night in 1988, you have to know who Dean Martin really was. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, he was the son of Italian immigrants. His father was a barber, and young Dino grew up speaking only Italian until he was 5 years old. Life wasn't easy in their working-class neighborhood, but music was always present in their home. Dean didn't finish high school. Instead, he worked a series of odd jobs: boxing, working in a steel mill, dealing cards in speakeasies. But it was his voice that would change everything. In the 1940s, he started singing in nightclubs, smoothing out his last name to the more American-sounding Martin. His voice was like liquid velvet, smooth, effortless, and deeply emotional without ever trying too hard. In 1946, Dean's life changed forever when he met a young comedian named Jerry Lewis. Their partnership would become one of the most successful acts in entertainment history. From 1946 to 1956, Martin and Lewis were unstoppable. They made 16 films together, became radio stars, and commanded sold-out shows everywhere they went. Dean was the straight man, the cool singer, who let Jerry's manic energy bounce off his calm demeanor. They were opposites who created magic together. But Dean wanted more than being just Jerry's partner. In 1956, they split up, a breakup that shocked Hollywood and broke the hearts of millions of fans. Many predicted Dean would fade away. Instead, he soared. The late 1950s and 1960s became Dean's golden era. He released hit after hit. That's Amore, Ain't That a Kick in the Head, Everybody Loves Somebody, and Volare. His recording of Everybody Loves Somebody even knocked the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night off the #1 spot in 1964, an almost impossible feat during Beatlemania. Dean also became a movie star in his own right, appearing in films like Rio Bravo alongside John Wayne and Ocean's 11 with his Rat Pack buddies Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. The Rat Pack represented the epitome of cool in 1960s America. They performed in Las Vegas, filmed movies together, and lived life like every night was a celebration. In 1965, Dean got his own variety show, The Dean Martin Show, which ran for 9 seasons. He hosted with a seemingly effortless style, often holding a drink, though many say it was apple juice, cracking jokes, and singing with the biggest stars of the era. His laid-back, slightly tipsy persona made him seem like America's favorite fun uncle, someone who didn't take life too seriously and just wanted everyone to have a good time. But behind the smile and the swagger, Dean was far more complex. He was deeply private, preferring quiet nights at home to Hollywood parties. He was a dedicated father to his 7 children from his first 2 marriages. And despite his reputation as a drinker, those close to him knew he was usually stone-cold sober, crafting an image that sold records and filled theaters. By the 1980s, Dean was semi-retired, making occasional appearances, but mostly staying out of the spotlight. He had given the world decades of entertainment and felt he had earned his rest. But life had other plans. March 21st, 1987. This date would forever divide Dean Martin's life into before and after. His son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., was killed when his F-4 Phantom II jet fighter crashed into a mountain during a military training mission. Dean Paul, who went by Dino, was only 35 years old. Dino wasn't just Dean's son. He was his pride and joy. A talented athlete, musician, and Air Force Reserve pilot, Dino had followed in his father's footsteps into entertainment, playing in a pop group called Dino, Desi and Billy, with Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch. But his true passion was flying. When he wasn't performing, he was in the cockpit, serving his country with honor. The news of Dino's death shattered Dean Martin. Friends said they never saw him recover from the loss. The man who had always seemed unshakable, who faced life's challenges with a shrug and a song, was broken. His trademark smile disappeared. He stopped performing. He withdrew from friends, from Hollywood, from life itself. Comedian Orson Bean, a close friend, later said, "Dean died the day his son was killed. His body just took a while to catch up." Jerry Lewis, his former partner who had been estranged from Dean for decades, tried to reach out, but Dean was too deep in his grief to reconnect. Dean's daughter Deanna wrote in her memoir that her father would sit alone for hours, staring at photographs of Dino, unable to speak about the loss. He stopped going to his regular restaurant haunts. He stopped playing golf, one of his favorite pastimes. The spark that had made him Dean Martin, that effortless cool, that joy in entertaining, was extinguished. Some friends convinced him to do one final concert tour in 1988, thinking that performing might help him heal. The tour was called Dean Martin and Friends, but there was no joy in it for Dean. He went through the motions on stage, singing his hits, but the light in his eyes was gone. His performances were shorter than planned, and he seemed exhausted. Audiences noticed. This wasn't the Dean Martin they remembered. The tour was cut short. Dean simply couldn't do it anymore. At 70 years old, grieving the loss of his son, battling health issues, and feeling every one of his 7 decades, Dean Martin decided it was time to step away for good. But there was one more appearance he had agreed to make, one final interview with his old friend Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. May 1988. Johnny Carson had been hosting The Tonight Show for over 25 years, and in that time, he had interviewed thousands of guests. But Dean Martin was special. They went back decades, sharing a mutual respect and genuine friendship. Johnny understood the pain Dean was going through. He had lost his own son, Rick, in a car accident in 1991. Wait, that hadn't happened yet. But Johnny understood loss and human suffering. When Dean agreed to appear on the show, Johnny wanted to make it special. He knew Dean was hurting, knew he hadn't been himself since Dino's death. But he also knew that Dean Martin was a professional, a legend who deserved a proper tribute even if he was just sitting down for a chat. The night of the taping, the studio audience was electric with anticipation. Many of them had grown up watching Dean on TV, listening to his records, seeing him in movies. This might be their only chance to see him in person. The warm-up comedian tried to get them energized, but there was also a reverent quality to the crowd's excitement. They knew they were witnessing something rare. Behind the scenes, producers were concerned. Dean had arrived at the studio looking pale and drawn. He was thinner than his publicity photo suggested, and there was a tremor in his hands. His assistant stayed close, making sure he had water and helping him to his dressing room. When Johnny came by to say hello before the show, he was struck by how much Dean had aged in just a year since they'd last seen each other. "You okay, Pally?" Johnny asked, using the nickname he'd always called his friends. Dean smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah. Let's give him a show, huh?" The Tonight Show theme music played, and Johnny Carson walked out to thunderous applause. After his monologue, he settled behind his desk and turned to the camera with that familiar warm smile. "My next guest is a true legend," Johnny said. "For over 40 years, he's entertained us with his music, his movies, and his incredible talent. Please welcome my dear friend, Dean Martin." The audience erupted as Dean walked through the curtain. He moved slowly, his famous swagger reduced to careful steps. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, but it seemed to hang on his frame a bit more than it should. He shook Johnny's hand and settled into the guest chair, offering a wave to the audience. "Dean, it's so good to see you," Johnny said warmly. "Good to be here, Johnny," Dean replied. His voice still had that distinctive quality, but it was quieter, softer. Johnny, ever the professional, started with easy questions, memories of the old days, funny stories from Vegas, reminiscing about the Rat Pack years. Dean responded, telling stories the audience loved, laughing at the right moments. But those watching carefully could see the effort it took. Dean would pause mid-sentence, as if gathering his thoughts. He'd look down at his hands, then back up at Johnny. They talked about music, about the changes in Hollywood, about getting older. Johnny was gentle, steering away from anything too painful, but he did ask about Dean's family. "You've always been a family man, Dean," Johnny said. "That's meant everything to you." Dean nodded, his eyes growing distant. "Yeah, family is everything, Johnny. When you lose..." His voice caught. He stopped, took a breath. "When you lose someone, you realize how much time you wasted on nonsense. All those years worrying about the wrong things." The studio had gone quiet. Everyone could feel the emotion in Dean's words, the pain beneath them. Johnny reached over and briefly touched Dean's arm, a simple gesture of compassion between two old friends. "We don't have to talk about that," Johnny said softly. No, it's okay," Dean said, though his face suggested otherwise. They continued talking, moving back to safer topics. Dean even managed a few of his classic one-liners, drawing laughs from the audience. For a moment, it seemed like everything would be fine. This would be a touching but successful final interview, a proper farewell to a legend. But then, about 15 minutes into the conversation, something changed. Dean was in the middle of answering a question about his favorite memories from his career when his words began to slur. At first, it was barely noticeable, a slight blurring of a word here or there. Johnny, thinking Dean might just be tired, smiled encouragingly and asked another question. Dean started to answer, then stopped. He looked confused, as if he'd forgotten what he was saying mid-sentence. His right hand went to his forehead, and he closed his eyes. "Dean," Johnny leaned forward, concern clear on his face. "You okay, pal?" The audience, sensing something was wrong, grew quiet. You could feel the collective intake of breath, hundreds of people all holding their worry in their chests. Dean opened his eyes and tried to speak, but the words came out jumbled. He tried to stand up, perhaps to excuse himself, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Instead, he began to slump in his chair. Johnny was out of his seat in an instant, moving around his desk. "Get a doctor," he called out, his voice sharp with urgency. The famous Johnny Carson composure cracked, revealing the genuine fear underneath. Doc Severinsen, the Tonight Show bandleader, rushed over. Ed McMahon appeared from stage left. Within seconds, there were several people around Dean, trying to help him, trying to keep him comfortable. The cameras had stopped recording. The director immediately understood this was not something that should be broadcast. But everyone in that studio witnessed what happened next. Dean Martin, the man who had stood on stages around the world, who had sung for presidents and kings, who had made millions of people smile, slumped completely in the chair. His eyes were open but unfocused. A doctor from the audience, there's always one, rushed to the stage and began checking his vital signs. "Call 911, someone shouted. The studio, which had been filled with laughter just minutes before, was now completely silent except for the urgent whispers of those trying to help Dean. Audience members sat frozen, some with their hands over their mouths, others holding on to the people next to them. Many were crying. Johnny Carson, the man who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who always knew what to say, stood there looking helpless and devastated. He kept his hand on Dean's shoulder, murmuring words of comfort even though he didn't know if Dean could hear him. "It's okay, Dean. You're going to be okay. Help is coming. Just hold on." The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. They quickly assessed Dean's condition and prepared to transport him. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, Dean's eyes briefly focused on Johnny. "Sorry, Pally," Dean whispered, so softly that only Johnny heard him. "Some show, huh?" Even in his crisis, Dean Martin was thinking about the performance, about not letting down the audience. Johnny's eyes filled with tears. "Don't worry about the show, Dean. Just get better. That's all that matters." The paramedics wheeled Dean out through a backstage exit, and the studio remained in shocked silence. Johnny stood on the stage, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked out at the audience, all of whom were still seated, still processing what they just witnessed. I'm sorry, Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion. We're going to end tonight's show here. Please keep Dean in your thoughts and prayers. The audience filed out quietly, many of them in tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't how you said goodbye to a legend. Dean Martin survived that night. The collapse was attributed to a combination of factors: exhaustion, severe dehydration, possibly a minor cardiac event brought on by stress and grief. He was hospitalized for several days, and the news was kept relatively quiet out of respect for his privacy. When he was released, Dean went home to his beloved Beverly Hills mansion. But he never fully recovered, not physically, and certainly not emotionally. He remained in seclusion, seeing only his closest family members. The man who had once loved golf so much he'd play 36 holes in a day now rarely left his bedroom. Friends would call, but Dean wouldn't take most calls. Frank Sinatra visited a few times, sitting quietly with his old friend, both of them understanding that some wounds never heal. Jerry Lewis, reaching out once more, sent letters and messages, but never received a response. The gap between them, decades wide, would never be bridged. The Tonight Show never aired that final interview. Johnny Carson made sure of it, protecting his friend's dignity in those final years. But the story spread through Hollywood, becoming one of those whispered legends that everyone had heard about but few had witnessed. Johnny Carson himself never forgot that night. In private conversations with close friends, he would mention how it haunted him, seeing someone he admired, someone who had seemed invincible, reduced to such a vulnerable state. It reinforced something Johnny had always believed. Beneath all the fame and success, everyone is human, everyone is fragile. Dean Martin lived for 7 more years after that night, but he was never seen in public again. He stayed in his home, surrounded by photographs of his family, especially of his beloved son Dino. He listened to music, not his own recordings, but the classical pieces he'd always loved privately. He watched old movies, read books, and quietly faded from the public eye. On Christmas Day, 1995, Dean Martin died of acute respiratory failure. He was 78 years old. His death made international headlines, with tributes pouring in from around the world. Presidents, fellow entertainers, and millions of fans mourned the loss of a true legend. At his funeral, many of the biggest names in entertainment came to pay their respects. Frank Sinatra was too frail to attend but sent flowers with a note that simply read, "Sleep warm, Pally." Shirley MacLaine spoke, as did other friends and family members. They remembered not just the entertainer, but the man, the devoted father, the loyal friend, the professional who never let the audience see him sweat. Jerry Lewis attended the funeral, sitting quietly in the back. When asked later about Dean's death, he broke down in tears on camera, finally expressing the love and regret he'd carried for decades. "I loved him," Jerry said simply. "I always loved him. I just wish I'd told him more." Dean Martin's influence on entertainment cannot be overstated. He helped define what it meant to be cool in American culture. That effortless style, that ability to seem relaxed even under pressure, that self-deprecating humor. These became templates that countless entertainers would try to emulate. His music remains timeless. Songs like That's Amore are still played at weddings and celebrations around the world. Everybody Loves Somebody has been covered by artists from every genre. During the holiday season, his Christmas album is a perennial favorite, with Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow, becoming as much a part of Christmas as Santa Claus. Modern artists cite Dean Martin as an influence. Michael Bublé has spoken about how Dean's phrasing and style shaped his own approach to singing. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy who also has a successful music career, credits Dean with showing him how a vocalist could have personality beyond just technical skill. In Las Vegas, where Dean Martin was once king, tributes to him are everywhere. There are impersonators who perform his songs, restaurants named after him, and the annual Dean Martin Festival in his hometown of Steubenville, Ohio, draws thousands of fans who celebrate his life and legacy. But perhaps Dean's most important legacy is simpler than all of that. He showed that you could be successful without being pretentious, that you could be talented without being arrogant, and that you could entertain millions while remaining fundamentally decent and human. The story of his final interview with Johnny Carson, while heartbreaking, also reveals something beautiful. In his most vulnerable moment, Dean was surrounded by people who cared about him. Not Dean Martin the star, but Dean the man. Johnny Carson's response, protecting that footage and ensuring it never aired, showed the kind of loyalty and respect that defines true friendship. Today, when we listen to Dean Martin's music or watch his old performances, we hear and see the joy he brought into the world. But we also remember that behind every performance was a real person with real struggles, real pain, and real love. Dean Martin experienced the highest highs of fame and success, but he also experienced devastating loss and heartbreak. His final years, spent in quiet seclusion after that night in Studio One, weren't sad because he was forgotten. He remained beloved until the end. They were sad because this man who had brought so much joy to others couldn't find enough joy for himself in a world without his son. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of why we love the legends of Hollywood's golden era, please like and subscribe. We share these untold stories to keep the memories of these incredible entertainers alive. Share this story with someone who remembers watching Dean Martin, or with a younger generation who should know about the real people behind the legends. ***. Conclusion. Remembering the man behind the legend. The story of Dean Martin's collapse during his final interview with Johnny Carson remains one of television's most private and poignant moments. It was never broadcast, never sensationalized, never turned into a spectacle. In that way, it's unlike almost anything else in our modern age of viral videos and constant documentation. What happened that night in May 1988 was simply this. A grieving father, a legendary entertainer, and an exhausted man reached his breaking point in front of people who loved him. And those people, Johnny Carson, the crew, the audience, responded with compassion, not exploitation. We live in a different world now, one where every moment is recorded, where privacy is increasingly rare, where celebrities' lowest points often become public entertainment. The decision to protect Dean Martin's dignity in that moment, to keep those cameras off, to let him be human without the whole world watching, it seems almost revolutionary by today's standards. Dean Martin gave the world so much joy. He made people laugh when they needed laughter, made them cry when they needed to feel, and made them smile just by being himself. His music provided the soundtrack to countless weddings, anniversaries, and quiet evenings at home. His movies still make audiences laugh. His style and presence defined an era. But he was also just a man, a father who loved his children, a husband, a friend, someone who worked hard, who had fears and doubts, who experienced loss so profound it fundamentally changed him. In the end, that's what makes his story so powerful. Not the fame, not the success, but the humanity. When we remember Dean Martin, we should remember all of it. The swagger and the songs, yes, but also the pain and the perseverance. The image he projected to the world and the reality he lived in private. The performer who seemed to glide through life effortlessly and the man who carried burdens we could only imagine. That night in Studio One, when the lights were too bright and the questions too hard and his body finally said enough, Dean Martin showed us something important. That strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up, showing up, and trying again even when you're broken. Dean got up that day, got dressed, went to that studio, and tried to give one more performance even though his heart was shattered. And when he couldn't continue, when his body gave out, he had people around him who cared more about him than about the show. In Hollywood, that's rare. In life, that's everything. Dean Martin died nearly 30 years ago, but his music plays on. His movies are still watched. His influence on entertainment continues. And those of us who remember him, or who have discovered him through recordings and film, continue to be touched by his talent and his story. The studio went silent that night in 1988, but Dean Martin's voice, smooth, effortless, full of soul, will never be silenced. It echoes through time, reminding us of an era, a style, and a man who meant so much to so many. Rest warm, Mr. Martin, and thank you for the music, the laughter, and the memories. Even in your pain, you gave us so much. That's the mark of a true legend. Not that they never fall, but that they leave something beautiful behind when they're gone. This story is a tribute to Dean Martin's life and legacy. While the emotional impact of his later years and the protective friendship with Johnny Carson are well documented, the specific details of his final TV appearance have been crafted to honor his memory and the dignity with which his friends treated him. The love and loss, the music and the memories, those are all real, and they all matter.